Here's my uncle's truck. It's a 2017 Ford F-250 powered by a 6.7 liter Power Stroke diesel. And he just took it to a shop to get a service done to it. And the shop said they found a flake of metal in the fuel filter. And they think that the CP4 high pressure fuel pump is starting to fail. So we're going to address that today. I'm a little bit skeptical of that shop's diagnosis because if they found a flake of metal in the fuel filter that they think came from the CP4, then that would mean the CP4 would have had to spit out a piece of metal that bypassed all the injectors and went through the return lines back to the tank to then get sucked back up and captured in the fuel filter. And it's unlikely that the CP4 would send metal down the return lines without also sending metal through the injectors and through all the high pressure lines. And being that this truck is currently running perfect, I don't think the CP4 is coming apart drastically because it doesn't sound like any injectors are struggling or missing, and it sounds like it's running perfectly smooth. So I think that was just the shop trying to get him to commit to some more work from them because they offered him to either put a disaster prevention kit on for $2,000 or replace the CP4 for $4,000. And they warned my uncle that if he didn't do anything and the CP4 did fail, that then it wipes out all the injectors and the whole fuel system, and all that stuff would need replaced, and that would be a $15,000 bill. So the true test will be to inspect the filter screen in the CP4 pump itself, and that'll show if the pump is degrading and starting to send metal shrapnel through the system. And if it does turn out that the CP4 looks healthy, I am going to put a disaster prevention kit, because that is an awesome add-on to these 6.7 Power Strokes, so that if your CP4 does fail, the disaster prevention kit make sure that that's the only part that needs replaced and it protects the rest of your fuel system. So let's tear apart this engine bay so we can get down to where the CP4 pump is, and then I'll give you guys a more thorough lesson of how the CP4 works and why it so commonly fails, and how a disaster prevention kit can save you a ton of money if your CP4 fails. Also, I haven't posted recently on YouTube just because I have been spending some time home with my family in Florida. I'm actually at the neighbor's shop right now. They're very nice to let us use all this space for me to work on my uncle's truck. And most of my time has been spent on my dad's truck up here. That's a 6.0 Power Stroke. And this thing's almost ready to be put back together. And this is what my next YouTube video is going to be on. It's going to be my longest video ever, but it's going to be a good one. We did some extensive work to this engine. So if you have any interest in 6 liters, tune into my next video that'll come out soon, because that'll be a thorough video on everything you need to know about 6.0 Power Strokes. But the focus of today's video will be my uncle's 6.7 Power Stroke. I'll go ahead and do all the work on his truck so that he doesn't have to deal with that other shop. And I'll do all the work for free since he's been such a good uncle to me. And also, I get a YouTube video out of it, so it's a good win-win. First step is I'm gonna undo the negative battery cables. Then open up our coolant reservoir to relieve any pressure there. So we can pop off this line. Then I'm just gonna plug this off somehow and then get it out underneath this vacuum line, unclip the vacuum line from all this, pull on this tab to release that, unclip here, another tab here, another connection up here, and then bend all of this out of the way. Now there's some wiring back here that connects to the intake manifold, so we need to get that out of the way so we can remove the intake manifold. There's a plug right here, and there's a tab right here that needs to pop out. And that harness also clicks down on the stud down here, so slide it off of that stud. Now I'll unclip this vacuum line with this clip here, and there's another one right down here. Pull up on this black collar. I'll release that vacuum. I'll disconnect it down here as well. Now I'll remove this piece of the intake right here, undoing these hose clamps. Now for this EGR pipe, there's this sensor wire. So we need to undo this whole wire. This plug is slotted in underneath this intake. So I pulled that out, and now we can disconnect this connector like that. Now I'll remove this EGR crossover pipe altogether with some 8mm bolts on either side. Here's the hot side intercooler pipe we gotta get in here on these little spring tabs and pop them up with a screwdriver. And then also loosen the hose clamp at the intercooler. Now that second pop loose. Now I'll remove the cold side intercooler pipe. So remove this wire clip out of the way and undo this whole plug. Then there's this ring for this collar as well, similar to the turbo. So we just gotta get it out of its groove and slide it off to the side. And this side will pop loose. And I already undid the clamp on the lower part of this hose. So now this whole piece can come out like that. All right, now I've gone through and loosened up all the bolts holding this plastic intake manifold on. A bunch back in here. There's some holding the dipsticks, so I zip tied those out of the way once I undid those. And they're just a pain to get to, but as long as you have a universal joint, 1/4 inch socket, you can get back in there and get them all. This fuel bowl here has to come out for this intake to be able to clear and come out. So let me undo all these lines. Now this canister rotates like this. And pops out of its holder. Now that the fuel filter canister's out, we gotta remove the housing that it sits in. So there's 4 8mm bolts, and then these fuel lines connect to this bolt, so you have to get rid of it. Once that fuel line's flexed out of the way, you can get the 4th bolt that's down in there. All right, this piece is finally out. Everything interferes with everything on your way out. All right, now we gotta disconnect the crankcase breather hose here. There's some heat shrink around this end, so we have to slice through that. And once that's peeled out of the way, we can tackle the plastic clips that hold it on. I have a cut piece of zip tie here because there's 3 of these tabs that you got to pick up with a screwdriver and then wedge something else underneath it to hold the clip up, because you can only get one of these up at a time. So now that one is held up, and now I'll tackle the rest of these. This plastic hose is very brittle, so you can't be too rough with it, but now I have the easiest clip to get to wedged open with a zip tie. And I'll take 2 picks and get at the other 2. And there we go. Now on this throttle body sort of thing, we'll undo this plug. There's a keeper. Just push this tab and then pry it out of there. Then we'll undo the clamp on the intake to the inlet of the turbo. Loosen up that hose clamp. And then this whole assembly is held on with a long bolt here, and then 2 bolts right here. 10mm. And now you just got to watch this throttle body piece here against this plastic, and this whole unit should work its way right out of here like that. Now that all those parts are out of the way, this engine bay has opened up a lot. We have clear access down into the valley of this engine, and there's our CP4 right there. We have to remove this regulator up top, which is 2 T25 bolts. So we'll get this plug undone. And then you need some sort of long and skinny T25 option to get to this back bolt, since this crossover interferes a little bit and you have to attack it at an angle. Now we'll gently work this piece out. And this is what we want to see. This screen has 0 metal flakes in it, and everything looks pristine and super clean. So we don't have any signs of a currently failing CP4. All right, that's all the teardown for that truck, so we'll start reassembling things, but now's a good time for a quick break. Whenever I visit home, the family dogs and I have a lot of fun playing together in the lake, and they're super high energy and will swim and run and chase each other for as long as we let them. However, when they splash around in the shallow water and the lake mud, they're getting exposed to all sorts of nasty bacteria, and in the past they've actually dealt with some mild infections. So now we stay on top of things by bolstering their immune system by targeting their gut, since 90% of your dog's immune system lives in the gut, and allergies, dental health, and joint pain are all often caused by a weak digestive system. That's why these dogs now enjoy Better Wild supplements. We're started a sponsor of today's video, and our vet-designed soft chew supplements for your dog's immune system and overall health. They have 3 main products: their allergy soft chews, dental and multivitamin soft chews, and their joint relief soft chews. I use the dental/multivitamin for these dogs to freshen their breath and support whole body health. Each Better Wild product is designed with natural ingredients to help re-strengthen your dog's gut with science-backed prebiotics, probiotics, and postbiotics, and provide them with essential daily vitamins. So go to betterwild.com/Goodrich or click the QR code for an exclusive Better Wild offer. Use code Goodrich at checkout. It stacks on top of already discounted pricing when you subscribe. This deal only works through my unique link, so make sure to click below. And thank you, Better Wild, for supporting the channel and these dogs. All right, now back to the video. I have a drawing of a CP4 here, and I'll use this to illustrate how a CP4 works, why it's so prone to failing catastrophically, and how a disaster prevention kit comes into play to protect the rest of your fuel system when this fails. So how a CP4 works is it has this camshaft lobe down here that rolls against these rollers on these plungers, pushing these plungers up and down, and that's what creates up to 30,000 psi of fuel pressure. The problem is that this pump's working so hard that this bottom end sometimes chews itself apart, especially because it's only lubricated by the diesel fuel that flows in through here. And diesel fuel is not that lubricative. So how fuel flows from the CP4 is that it comes from the fuel filter and comes in to the bottom end of the CP4 to lubricate the bottom. And then most of that gets returned back to the tank, and the rest of the diesel goes up to the top to feed the tops of these plungers to then pressurize the fuel and send it off to the injectors. And the failure point on CP4s is always the bottom end. So once that starts tearing itself apart, it sends metal shrapnel up to the top, and then the metal shrapnel gets sent off to the injectors, the high pressure fuel rails, all your fuel lines, and back into the tank, so everything needs cleaned or replaced. So how a disaster prevention kit works is it has a machine piece of aluminum that blocks off this fuel flow coming from the bottom end of the CP4, and it has another fuel line that tees into the fuel feed line. So that allows a stream of freshly filtered fuel straight from the fuel pump to come and feed the plungers and send fresh fuel off to your injectors. And then the second part of a disaster prevention kit is an added fuel filter over here. So this original fuel route still feeds the bottom crankcase of your CP4 to keep it lubricated. And then instead of returning to the tank, it returns to this fuel filter, which catches any material before it goes off to return to the tank. So if the bottom end starts disintegrating, all that metal gets caught up in this fuel filter instead of passing on to your injectors or back to your fuel tank. So a disaster prevention kit can't do anything to prevent a CP4 failure, but it is amazing at catching all the debris when a CP4 does fail, and that keeps the rest of your fuel system alive, so that the only part you have to replace is your CP4, which is around $1,200, instead of your entire fuel system, which ended up being at least a $12,000 bill. This truck's going to get an S&S diesel disaster prevention kit, and they were the pioneers when it came to disaster prevention kits. And there have been some other companies that have come out with some cheaper knockoff alternatives. However, S&S is a leader as far as highest quality, best fitting kit, and we're still only talking about $400 for this kit. So it's very, very cheap insurance to protect your engine against a $12,000 to $15,000 repair bill. Running through the kit real quick. Here's our T-line that sends the new feed over to the top of the CP4 with this special aluminum milled piece that diverts the flow. And then on the return side, we have this nice milled filter housing. It comes with this Donaldson fuel filter that threads onto this housing, and this is a generic filter that's easy to come by, so when it comes time to service this filter, it's easy to find. It has instructions, and then some more lines for the return filter, and any other bits of hardware needed for this kit. All right, here's this machined aluminum piece, and they got this lower and upper O-ring installed, because now our FCA slots into the top of this. And then this will plug into the hole that this was in. So let's put this in. All right, that's seated in there. I had the back bolt slotted in already, and now the front bolt can go in there. And start getting things threaded in. And this kit comes with these new bolts that are slightly longer to make up for the extra thickness of that aluminum. They're a 4mm Allen head, and it's helpful to have a long extension with a ball end so you can sneak back and get this rear one threaded in. And then these torque to 60 inch-pounds. Now we'll just get the connector plugged back in, and it's a little safety pressed in, and that's complete there. Now we'll just start with reassembly. Let's lower our intake first. This piece pops right in with its 3 bolts. They torque to 18 foot-pounds. I'll get the turbo clamp tightened up as well. Then we'll plug the crankcase vent hose back into here. Now we'll get this upper intake in. These bolts are captive, and you can kind of rotate them and get them seated up here so they're not sticking out. So hopefully this will sneak back in here. Got all the bolts on this plastic manifold torqued down. They do follow a torque sequence and torque to 89 inch-pounds. So next I'll get this fuel filter housing in here. Now we can get this fuel filter installed in its holder. Get these dipsticks mounted back where they need to go. Now I'll reconnect the feed line to this filter housing. And then this line that used to go to the middle, we're substituting out. So I'll get a rag down here for catch the fuel when we undo that fitting. We don't need this part anymore, because now this new fuel line that connects down to that CP4 fitting we installed earlier will connect in the place of that line. So I'll remove these dust covers. And get this piece installed And then this return line can also plug back into the housing. Now the kit comes with these zip ties and fuel line clamps here, so we'll get this fixture to where it's not rubbing on anything. So I'll get a zip tie around the oil fill. As well as one attached around the crankcase breather. Here's a return line back to the tank, so we need to unplug this fitting from here. Then we need to take this fitting and rotate it upwards. Like that. And we'll put the new S&S line, plug this end, this return metal barb like that, and then plug this end into the return line that heads back to the tank. Snap that in. So now we have these two fittings that'll mount to our filter. Now for the filter head, we'll thread in its fittings. These fittings get a O-ring that are lubed up. Put them in here, and then this is all aluminum, and these only torque to 10 foot-pounds. Then take the fuel filter, lubed up the O-ring, thread it on here, and there's these rubber isolators. Thread these on the mount. And then attach the bracket that goes on those. Now the filter will sit in here. Return from the engine will plug into this side. Return back to the fuel tank, plugs into this side. And now there's a mounting hole underneath this plastic, so I need to pop this trim up. And then we can remove this plastic push pin from this hole. And now we have a hole there that we'll mount this to. Now we have a bolt, a spacer, and a nut. Thread this bolt down. And then the spacer. Cinch this up. And this trim piece snap back down. And now everything associated with the disaster prevention kit has been installed. So now I just need to reassemble the rest of the engine. Just put in the hot side intercooler pipe. So I'll get this clamp cinched down. I reinstalled the plug on the throttle body. So now our cold side intercooler pipe will be reattached. And get its ring back in its groove. I'll reinstall this vacuum line and get its clips latched back in. Now our EGR crossover pipe can slot back into here. These torque to 89 inch-pounds. I'll plug its plug back in, which then slots back into its home. down there. And then the air intake can snap back in. And now all these coolant lines can be flopped back over the engine this way. I stuck a Sharpie in this end. That ended up fitting perfectly. Get all these, get all the respective clamps plugged back in where they need to be. There's also this wire that plugs back into this. And now just the battery connections need reinstalled. Now I'll put the truck on accessory, and then the electric fuel pump can run. Come down in here and check for leaks as it purges all the air. You can hear the air hissing out of the system. Moment of truth. This truck's back in business. Subscribe and make sure to tune in to my next video to see my dad's 6.0 Power Stroke engine get completely transformed.